I'm not wanting to make this a storytelling marathon, but by now we all know the way of stories, that they are ingredients like a chemistry, and when we put them together, they are evocative. So let's see what these several stories evoke in us as a response. First, there's that story about the old woman who lived in a remote village in far-off Tibet, and she was totally devoted to the Buddha. She worshipped the Buddha every day and every moment of her life. Every morning, in the early morning, she would arise and light her butter lamp and prostrate herself in front of her altar. And in the moments of the day, she could be seen intoning the sutras as she went about her daily affairs. Now it so happened that her son was a trader and was going off on one of his expeditions to India. So she asked her son, please, when you come back from your travels, will you bring me a relic of the Buddha? Well, her son came back from his trading mission, but he'd completely forgotten about her request. So when he went off on his next trading expedition, she again importuned him, please bring me back a relic of the Buddha. But again he forgot. And the third time, when he was making his journey to India for trading purposes, she said to him, if you don't bring back a relic of the Buddha for me, I'm going to kill myself. But on the way back from his journeying, with his yaks laden with goods, he remembered that he'd forgotten his mother's request once again. But as it so happened, he happened to pass along the road the carcass, the bones of a dead dog. So he got down from his wagon, he went over and extracted one of the incisors of the dog, and taking a piece of silk from his baggage, he quickly wrapped it in silk. And when he got back to his mother's house, he handed it over to her, saying that this was a relic of the Buddha that he'd obtained at great cost in India. Well, with very great reverence, the old woman took the tooth and placed it on her altar with her butter lamps and her offerings, and continued her prostrations every day. But an amazing thing happened. The tooth began to emanate light. And it was found that visitors who came were healed of their maladies, found peace and solace when they came in the presence of this tooth, radiating and shining. And for the remainder of that woman's life, people began to come from everywhere to receive the blessings of what it was that this tooth emanated. And for many long years after her death, people made pilgrimages to that altar in that remote village because of the power of that tooth. Then, one day, Mullah Nasruddin was sitting in the coffee shop with his cronies, when all of a sudden, a little boy ran in and said, Mullah, 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 your cousin Hassan has been hauled up in front of the emperor because he stole a loaf of bread from the baker and he's going to be beheaded tomorrow. Well, Mullah was greatly shocked, and he immediately got up from his coffee drinking and hastened to where Hassan was being incarcerated. And he was allowed to go into Hassan's presence, and when he was in Hassan's presence, he said, I know that you've got 8 children and you've had no work and no way of keeping your family, but here, he took off his prayer beads, old prayer beads, and he handed them to Hassan, and then he whispered in Hassan's ear. Now, the very next day, when all the townspeople had been gathered, and the emperor himself, who at that time was Tamerlane, who was renowned for being a cruel and even sadistic ruler, was present at this beheading. So just before the executioner was going to bring his sword down on Hassan's neck, Hassan said, wait, monarch, wait. I have a gift for you. I am an unworthy man. But here, I have these beads. And when they are in the hands of a pure, kindly man, they will turn to diamonds. Well, Tamerlane was in a dilemma because he immediately thought of all of those times of cruelty, his own misdeeds. But here was all of his people. If he took these beads and they didn't turn to diamonds, he'd be degraded in the eyes of his people. What could he do? But Mullah Nasruddin, with his impeccable timing, at that moment shouted out, Tamerlane is a merciful king. Ah! Immediately Tamerlane had his way out, taking himself up to his full height and with a degree of arrogance said, Tamerlane is a merciful ruler. He has diamonds aplenty. He needs none. Keep your beads, but now you will have to serve the baker for 6 months as punishment. Well, the end result was good for all concerned. Tamerlane was off the hook. Hassan, who then became a servant of the baker for 6 months and was found to be such a good worker that the baker kept him on permanently, and in time to come he opened his own baker shop and was able to keep all of his children in food and clothing for the rest of their days. And the third and final story is about a man called Simon bin Yusuf. And Simon bin Yusuf was a very pious man. He went to the synagogue religiously. He fulfilled all the requirements of the festivals. And he had handed over his family to the workings of the divine. But he began to have doubts. He wondered to himself about his neighbor, a widower who had lost her only son. And he wondered, look at all of those other families that are complete. They have many children, and yet my neighbor's only son is taken from her. And then a rich family, the family of a man who was himself an almsgiver, kind, but became poor, lost everything, became paupers. And so it went on. And so he began to importune God. Please, God, I know your miracles, but if only Elijah the prophet could come and I could see for myself the workings of your miracles to assuage my doubts. Because we know Elijah the prophet is the one who would come down amongst men when they were in need, and indeed perform the miracles that were needed. But one day, he was walking in the fields, and he was accosted by an old man who said, "I am Elijah the prophet, and I ask you what it is that you want of me." "Oh," he said, "please, can I travel with you and witness your miracles so that my doubts can be erased?" Now, Elijah the prophet said, "On those travels, you will wonder in trying to understand, and you will ask questions, and that will take time." Oh no," he said, I promise that I will not question you." And Elijah said, "If you do so, I will leave immediately." So they went on their travels together, and they came to a very, very small farmhouse in which there lived an elderly couple and their one cow, where they were given hospitality for the night and given the simple meal of bread and cheese that was to offer. But then the next day, before they were leaving, the old couple's cow dropped dead. So as they were walking down the road, it was wondered, why in this instance the good hospitality and kindness of this elderly couple was repaid with the death of their cow. And he could not keep quiet and said to Elijah, Why did this happen?" Elijah said, "Remember, I told you if you asked questions, I would leave you." "Oh," he said, I'm sorry, I will keep quiet. I will not ask." But inside his heart was churning with doubts. And so they went along, and before long, as the dusk was coming down, they came to a very opulent house. And when they knocked on the door, the rich owner of that house sent his servant to the door. And when it was found that they were humble travelers seeking somewhere to stay for the night, they were relegated out to the barn where the animals were and given some stale bread to eat. The next morning, when they were taking their leave, it was noticed that there was a very large tree that had been uprooted and fallen in the grounds of the property. And as they were passing, obviously with the intervention of Elijah, the tree stood up straight again, its roots being sent even deeper into the ground than before. And again it was questioned, why when this man was unkind to us, was this allowed to happen? The tree uprooted, made to root itself again. But keeping his counsel this time, they went further along in their travels. And this time, in the evening, they came to a synagogue. And when they entered, they could see that this synagogue was a place of worship of many, many, many rich people. There were gold chalices and menorahs and all adorning this very beautiful place. But no one came to greet them. No one offered them hospitality. No one in any way acknowledged their presence. So they joined the ritualistic service, and being left, they had to sleep on the hard boards of the pews of the synagogue throughout the night. But again, in the morning, of course, there were people who had gathered. And Elijah said to these people, "May you be blessed by being all leaders." Well, there was great shock. How could Elijah say that to these people who hadn't offered nothing to them? Nothing. And then they went on, and the same evening came to another synagogue that was obviously just of ordinary people. And yet they were greeted with great hospitality, given food for the night and lodging. In the morning, Elijah said to them, "May you be blessed with only one leader." Well, this was too much to us. And there was an outpouring. Why? What did you do this for? Why did this happen? And Elijah said, "You were told that I would leave you, but I will tell you. With the elderly couple, the old woman was about to die, so I importuned the Lord to let her live, but the cow had to be sacrificed. The tree that was uprooted, underneath was a great treasure that would have been found if the tree had not been put back in place again. The treasure not deserved by the owner of that place." In the synagogue, to be given the blessing of many leaders is really a curse, because when there are many leaders, there can be no consensus, no agreement, and in the absence of agreement, there is no contentment or peace. In the final synagogue, to be given the blessing of one leader is to be blessed with someone who can gather people together in harmony and bliss. "But," said Elijah, "before I leave you, I give you a piece of advice." In listening to these three stories, feeling their chemistry within us, what for you would be the advice that Elijah gave?
Trust.
In what?
To be non-judgmental.
That everything is God's grace.
Nothing is as it seems.
Nothing is as it seems. And when we relate this and feel what it is that these stories evoke in us relative to the question that's been asked, what is the nature of emptiness?
Emptiness is probably a space of no mind. And from there the response arises.
Yes. So we have in this not only the chemistry of what it is that the stories evoke in us, but it gives us the possibility of understanding the deeper awareness and seeking that we might have. Because behind everything is that power. We know when we gather together in meditation, meditation itself creates a space. Isn't it so?
Mm.
We know scientifically, because of the mind, the nature of the mind, that to be put in a certain state, or to bring ourselves to a certain state, is a state of receptivity. So when we put all of this together, there is the possibility that we will come to accept, not just understand emptiness through its nature. And to understand that nature, we have to know existence and the workings of existence. How else can we know emptiness? How can we know movement if there's no stillness? How can we understand stillness if there's no movement? So let's dive deeper and deeper.